Hello and welcome to The Hindu. I'm Priyali Prakash and you're watching Tipping Point, a weekly series where we dive into climate change events and the trends shaping our future. In this week's episode, we'll take a look at the end of coal power plants in the UK, a Sumatra squall in Singapore, and Fridays for Future. The United Kingdom is moving away from coal power for good. On September 30th, the 2000 megawatt Ratcliffe coal plant in Nottinghamshire will shut operations, ending the UK's 142-year-long tryst with coal power. The UK's first coal-fired power station, which was also the world's first to produce electricity for public use, was the Edison Electric Light Station built in London in 1882. The 2024 deadline for coal phase-out to generate electricity was announced by former Energy and Climate Change Minister Anne-Marie Trevelyan in June 2021, largely based on the 2012 Energy Act, which set goals for decarbonisation, electricity market reform, and more.
Here in the UK, we would like to announce today that we are bringing forwards our coal phase-out date from 2025 to 2024, and the UK will no longer use coal to generate electricity from the 1st of October 2024.
Carbon price floor, which is the price paid by power generators based on per ton of carbon dioxide emitted, was introduced in 2013 to transition towards a low-carbon economy. The policy received some criticism too, with critics saying that it doesn't really contribute towards reducing emissions but disadvantages UK industries by increasing costs. Through a series of policy measures, UK's dependence on coal decreased considerably in the last 12 years. In 2012, 40% of UK's power generation came from coal, which reduced to 1.8% in 2020. This is also in line with the government's plan to decarbonise the power sector and eliminate the UK's contribution to climate change by 2050. What's interesting to note here is that although the UK has moved away from coal power, natural gas is now its largest power source. In 2023, 32% of the UK's power came from burning gas, which, at the end of the day, is a fossil fuel source, even if it produces lower emissions than petrol and coal. UK is a net importer of natural gas, which means that it doesn't produce enough to meet its needs. Renewable energy sources in the UK have grown rapidly in the last decade, especially wind, as well as solar and hydroelectric. In fact, UK is home to the world's largest offshore wind farm, and an even bigger one is under construction off the coast of England. Wind energy has had a significant role to play in the UK's move away from coal. However, wind and solar energy depend on local weather and often have backups from conventional fossil fuel sources. According to the data sourced from 2023 Global Carbon Budget by Our World in Data, gas was the second largest source of carbon dioxide emissions by fuel or industry type in the UK. The largest was oil. Until 2022, the UK has cumulatively produced 78.83 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions, which accounts for the fourth largest global cumulative share of emissions until 2022. During his tenure, former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak backed plans for new fossil fuel drilling off Britain's coast. The North Sea Transition Authority, responsible for regulating oil, gas, and carbon storage industries, ran a new offshore oil and gas licensing round last year and awarded new licenses in January and May this year. Drilling in seas for more oil warms oceans and raises sea levels, which are well-known consequences of climate change. While the Climate Action Tracker rates the UK's net zero target as sufficient, it lacks in other areas like policies and actions and NDC targets, which pull down its overall assessment to insufficient. Is moving away from coal a good step? Definitely. Every step away from dependence on fossil fuels counts towards controlling emissions and global warming. Is it enough? Well, the UK has historically been the fourth largest contributor of carbon dioxide emissions and should lead in phasing out fossil fuel dependence by setting a stronger example. This week's extreme weather event of note is the Sumatra squall that hit Singapore on September 17th, bringing strong winds and heavy rain to the tiny city-state on the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. Singapore is no stranger to a Sumatra squall, which, as the name suggests, typically develops over the Sumatra Islands in Indonesia or the Strait of Malacca to its west. This is usually an organized line of thunderstorms and lasts for under a couple of hours, bringing brief but intense rain to Singapore. It is a local weather phenomenon and passes quickly. According to local reports, the squall uprooted multiple trees and caused destruction in its path. This particular Sumatra squall was unusual since it struck in the evening. Sumatra squalls usually strike Singapore overnight or early morning. Also, the wind gusts associated with Sumatra squalls are usually in the range of 40 to 80 kilometers per hour, but the Tuesday storm touched a slightly higher speed of around 83 kilometers per hour at East Coast Parkway.
Yeah, that could be one of the major reason for intensifying an unusual event, because if we see the weather map and events, we experience a strong typhoon in the Western Pacific Ocean just near Philippines during that time. So when we see a very low pressure system or typhoon on the Western Pacific Ocean, so what air does, it pulls all the air from the high pressure region or the nearby region to the low pressure region. And during that time, or even now, it's a southwest monsoon period. So meaning the wind in the lower atmosphere blows from southwest direction to the northeast direction. So when there is a presence of low pressure system or typhoon in the Western Pacific, it causes a significant increase in speed or increase in the wind from this Indian Ocean, Eastern Indian Ocean towards the South China Sea. And incidentally, that at that time that Sumatra squall also happened. So it is very much possible that due to presence of that typhoon, it become more stronger, and also it could have happened at the unusual time. But another thing we also seen in the satellite image, during that time there was a line of convective clouds from Eastern Indian Ocean, even north of Australia, that region, equatorial region. So maybe that also could be another factor, but we need still more studies to accurately understand why that happened.
Fridays for Future, a youth-led international movement to highlight the lack of action on climate crisis, is our this week's source of climate hope. The movement started in 2018 when well-known activist Greta Thunberg, who was then just 15 years old, began protesting in front of the Swedish parliament to demand action on climate change. She was joined by other activists, and soon enough, the movement spread worldwide, including multiple cities. On September 20th, young college students and activists planned a march to the Delhi Secretariat in the national capital as part of the global climate strike under Fridays for Future. Their demands include an immediate reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, a transition to renewable energy, climate education and awareness, and to transform Delhi into a cycling-friendly city.
ये हमारी नंबर 1 डिमांड है that we need immediate reductions in greenhouse gases, क्योंकि दिल्ली में इतनी सारी cars हैं, so there should be some or the other kind of scheme or maybe policy to regulate that, to promote public transport, to promote cycling as a more sustainable alternative and also a more healthier alternative instead of owning a private vehicle. Another demand is climate education. Even though हमारे पास mandatory environmental education है, thanks to Mehta sir, जिनकी वजह से ये rule लागू हुआ, but still the curriculum is not at all comprehensive, it is not holistic, and it is not practical. We need a curriculum, we need an education जो कि सिर्फ awareness पे नहीं, but implementation पे काम करे.
And we want these policymakers to think about these things. Don't cut trees, take immediate steps about all the violations that are happening in the name of development in the city. There are many more issues, waste management. It's pathetic. I personally went to one of the landfills, and you know what? There are a lot of employees who are working there, They are hired on ad hoc basis, and they don't have proper or adequate trainings to escape any mishap. Every year, around May or June, when the heat is too much, our sunlight just reflects on a, glass particle there, and we all hear the news about, fires in landfills and all, which ultimately contributes to pollution. There are other factors as well. Like one of the biggest factors which I consider is leave it to big industries, big industrialists.
The organizers had initially planned to conduct a march from the ITO metro station in Delhi to the Secretariat, but were denied permission by the police. They staged brief protests at both locations, but were unable to meet the government representatives. The authorities reportedly cited power transfer from former Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal to Atishi as the reason. That's all from this week's Tipping Point. Thank you for watching. For more videos like this, please subscribe to The Hindu.